All right, our next topic could be really hopeful or really depressing, and I'm curious to see how it goes. It's between dreams and disillusionment, young Jews and the state of Israel. I'm hoping for hopeful, may not be. And it's a discussion, sort of panel style, and we will be joined by Libby Lenkinski. She is the Vice President for Public Engagement at the New Israel Fund. Prior to joining NIF, Libby worked as the Director of International Relations at the Association for Civil Rights in Israel, otherwise known as ACRI, and as a strategy consultant for human rights organizations. We'll also be joined by Reis. He's the special assistant to the CEO of the Anti-Defamation League. Harry started his position at ADL this fall after 2 years at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, where he served with distinction as a research associate and aide to Ambassador Dennis Ross, and David Makovsky, working on projects related to the Israeli-Palestinian negotiations and Iran nuclear negotiations. And finally, on the panel, we have Yoav Schaefer. He made Aliyah to Israel in 2006. After completing a full service in the IDF, he worked in various professional capacities relating to Jewish education, Israeli politics, and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Yoav and his family founded the Avi Schaefer Fund, dedicated to nurturing values of mutual respect and understanding through informed dialogue and empowering young people to be change makers in the world. Yoav writes and speaks regularly on issues relating to Judaism, Israel, and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Moderating this discussion is Mimi Kravetz, who began her career as a Jewish nonprofit professional at Stanford Hillel, and after many years in the business world, weaving through Harvard, American Express, and Google, rejoined Hillel in 2015 as the inaugural Chief Talent Officer. Please welcome them to the stage.
Great. Well, it's a pleasure to be helping close this conference by focusing on our future. We're excited to have this conversation with millennials and young people, talking about millennials and young people, and what our generation thinks about when we think about Zionism, what's problematic, and also what's possible in the relationship of young Jews and Israel. Our time is really limited, and we know we are the last act of the night. So we're going to use a first question to have all of you introduce yourselves and also get right to the topic at hand. The world is really fascinated by millennials. You can read articles about millennials and how they work, how they act. Help us, from your perspective, understand who these young people are and how they relate to Judaism and to Israel. What do you see as the dreams and disillusionments that we're talking about on this panel today? And so we get to know each of you a little bit better through your answer. Let's make sure to weave in a little bit of your own story and where you stand on some of these issues and why this is so important to you personally. And Libby, I'd love it if you'd start.
Thanks, Mimi, and thanks to the JCC for having us here. This is an incredibly important conversation to me. I'm Libby, and I'm 38 years old, so I'm not exactly a millennial. But what I want to tell you about that is being 38 means that when I was coming of age politically, when I was a teenager and an adolescent, and just starting to understand how to see the world, how to see my Jewish community, and how to see Israel, it was the 90s. So, I was 17 when Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated, and the years before that were a time that felt to a young teenager growing up in the Jewish community in Philadelphia to Israeli parents. It was a time that felt like hope was abound, like Israelis were coming together in new ways and exciting ways, and that something good was just around the corner. And regardless of the hindsight that we may look back at that time with, the emotional reality that was the underscore of my relationship to Israel as a young adult was about that positivity. Now, if you look at people just a little bit younger than me who were coming of age politically after the Rabin assassination, when Oslo is falling apart, when the Second Intifada is happening, what's happening in the news, what's happening in the public space for those people coming of age politically does not look like something good right around the corner. Whatever we can agree about or disagree about the policies and the politics of that time, it felt like scary things are happening in Israel, hard things, problems, and that's a totally different backdrop for developing a relationship with Israel, a place that's far away. And the younger you go, the more like that it feels. So people younger than that, people who are 30 years old today, come of age politically in a time when we are post-Second Intifada, and there's still quite a bit of fear and security challenges that are impacting people's emotional connection to Israel. Younger than that, we start to see headlines about what Israel's doing in Gaza, and young people are coming of age into that moment with that as their emotional backdrop. For me, and people that are 35 and older, we have the emotional memory of the 90s. It's not how I have looked into the news much since then, but it was the formative moment of my relationship to Israel. And when I look at what young people talk about, and I work quite a bit with young people on college campuses and immediately after their college experience, the underpinning of their relationship to Israel was built on a totally different emotional reality than my own. Now, that's not about Israel right or wrong, good or bad. It's about the place that we're coming from when we talk to young people, that they don't have their own lived emotional memory of that kind of relationship. It's a totally different conversation, and I think we're going to say a lot more about what that means and the implications of it. That's by way of introduction to me and who I am, and what I see when I'm talking to young people about Israel, that they're missing that very important positive emotional connection that I feel lucky to have grown up into.
First of all, it's really an honor to be here, and I want to thank the organizers for having me and for having this panel and for having young people on a panel about young people, which is a strangely radical idea in the Jewish community. So, the idea, some of the reasons for the shifting attitudes among young people toward Israel are quite complicated, and we'll get into some of them. We won't get into all of them. I want to focus on one particular trend that I see that I think hasn't really been sufficiently recognized in a lot of Jewish spaces. Our community often places the burden of explanation for why young Jews are distancing themselves or are changing attitudes towards Israel on the fact that they're either uninformed or unengaged. In some ways, it's much easier for us to see them as apathetic or as not knowledgeable at Israel, as that the positions and attitudes that they're taking vis-a-vis Israel are the result of ignorance or of a weakening sense of Jewish identity. It's much harder, I think, for our community, but much more important for us to recognize that many young Jews, an increasing number of young Jews, are feeling increasingly alienated by Israel as a result of Israel's own policies. Again, this isn't true for all millennials, but I do think it is true for a significant number of American young Jews. Policies around the occupation and settlements in particular, but also trends happening within Israeli society itself. The rightward shift of Israeli politics, the Orthodox monopoly on religion, and recent attempts to undermine the legitimacy of Israel's democratic institutions and ethos. All of these are causing young Jews to feel increasingly alienated by Israel, to see Israel as something with which they don't always feel comfortable identifying, and they want to be openly critical about Israel's policies. They don't want to defend policies to which they are fundamentally opposed. And more than that, they want Jewish institutions to at the very least, create space for their voices, to see the concerns and ideals that they bring to bear on our communal conversations around Israel as valid, as rooted in a deep understanding of Israel and a deep engagement with Israel, and as a manifestation of their love for and commitment to Israel. And so they want our institutions to take them seriously and to include them within our communal conversations around Israel. Instead, many of our institutions have shunned them, have labeled them sometimes as heretics, as self-hating Jews. Our institutions haven't been receptive enough to their voices and haven't accommodated the kinds of critical engagement that they're looking for in our communities. In some sense, we've defined pro-Israelism in such narrow terms that we can't accommodate a position that is both committed to Israel but critical of certain policies. And as a result of that, young Jews are feeling doubly alienated, on one hand by the state of Israel, and on the other hand by Jewish institutions in this country. And I think the challenge that our community faces in a very real way is to take their concerns seriously and to encourage them to bring the same sophistication and intellectual curiosity that they bring to every other aspect of their life to our communal conversations around Israel, and to foster an environment that really encourages that kind of engagement. The irony is that Zionism at its core was always a movement of Jewish self-criticism. Zionism at its best is a set of competing ideologies vying to determine the future of the Jewish polity in Israel. And Jews themselves have always been a self-critical people. We have a rich tradition of dissent and debate. And I think that finding a way to embrace that tradition when it comes to Israel is the only way that our community will be able to talk about the single most important issue in the Jewish world today, which is ironically the one thing about which we cannot talk. I will just say that I see myself very much as part of the demographic I'm describing. I'm a bit different because I've lived in Israel and I served in the army, and so but I came back to go to college in America after spending 5 years in Israel, and was very frustrated by the kinds of conversations I was encountering, conversations that didn't even reflect the diversity of opinions within Israel's own political discourse. And so a lot of the work that I've done over the past few years has been with helping Jewish institutions, Hillel in particular, helping them to understand the reality that many young Jews are confronting, and that Jewish institutions haven't, I think, been receptive enough to.
So I think listening to all of the remarkable people who've shared their thoughts today, one of the questions I have that this is entailed in this question is, in regards to our generation, is the dream of Zionism big enough to encompass young people? And I was listening closely to something that Rabbi Gordis mentioned, in which Yehuda Kurtzer responded to. And I actually think Danny had said that enough talk about the occupation and religious pluralism in Israel. I think what's really necessary is conversations around American Jewish Seder tables that are about Israeli poetry and Israeli literature and the new kind of cultural vibrancy that's coming from Israel. And Yehuda responded to him in his remarks by saying that's probably not the answer. And so I guess I want to answer the question somewhere between those poles. I, on my desk, keep a document that I found in my grandmother's basement, which is her handwritten notes in pencil on the back of her father's stationery from his paper company, listing the vote in November 1947 at the United Nations General Assembly. All of the jobs I've had working for Ambassador Ross and now at the Anti-Defamation League, that document is sort of the most living manifestation of the commitments that I've had. And there's something truly exciting about this moment and break in the context of Jewish history, so few years after the Jewish people's greatest tragedy, to see the emergence of this state. And I look at it and I sense the just sheer excitement in the birth of this new era. And truly, I do believe that the Zionist narrative and its achievements contain a tremendous source of meaning and of an opportunity to be the basis of a exchange, a meaningful exchange between Jews in America and in the diaspora broadly, and in Israel. But I don't think that that can be the answer. I do actually think that young people are struggling with issues that Yoav just raised now, in which Yehuda Kurtzer described, issues that go to a fundamental sense of identity and to a sense of issues of justice, which are core to American Jews' self-understanding, which is something we understand from data studying American Jews. So I believe that that is the necessary basis. A really deep acquaintance is a necessary basis for grappling with those issues, but avoidance is likely not going to be the path to solving the millennial question. I think millennials are looking for genuine conversation, and they really want to be part of a broader discourse on how to approach the fundamental questions which Zionism is facing today, about the future disposition of the territories, its conflict with the Palestinians, and the basic nature of what the Jewish state will look like, whether it will be a robust democracy with full rights for its citizens, or whether its identity as a Jewish state will overshadow its historic achievement as a democracy in the Middle East.
All right, so you all brought up a lot of really interesting points on all the different things in your introductions, and about the identity of young Jews today and where it comes from, about the need to really have these tough conversations. And Jewish institutions know this, right? I work for Hillel International, and the vision of Hillel is to help every Jewish student make an enduring commitment to Jewish life learning in Israel. And we often talk about creating that big tent in that space. And local Hillels run a plethora of programs to create this space, and many other Jewish institutions are engaging in this way. So I'm interested in hearing you talk about, when you look out at the organized Jewish world, or in pockets that are even individually organized, what do you see that's working really well in engaging young people with Israel, and for the things that are not what stands in the way, because it's certainly not for lack of trying and experimenting. So I'm really interested in hearing your perspective and what's out there, what's working, and for the things that are not working, what stands in our way. And
okay, so I'm going to answer the second part of your question, or the first part of your question second, if that's okay. I think, in some ways it's natural that each generation brings a new set of concerns and sensibilities to the fore around any issue, partly because of what Libby was saying, that our worldviews are shaped by different historical experiences, by a different set of ideological concerns. And I think that what is happening in our community is that we're going through a paradigm shift around Israel. Our institutions were largely created under a particular set of assumptions when it came to Israel. Not all institutions are the same, but I think that there were a certain set of guiding principles or assumptions that many Jewish institutions organized the way that American Jews relate to Israel around. Some of those assumptions include the idea that Israel is a robust democracy, that diaspora Jewry, because they're not citizens of Israel, don't have a right to publicly criticize Israeli policies, but need to support Israel unconditionally. And 3, that Israel's leaders are committed to the pursuit of peace within the parameters of a two-state solution. There are other assumptions, but those are some of the 3 that I've recognized. I think that those 3 assumptions no longer hold true for many young Jews. They are looking at the rise of political constituencies in Israel that are challenging Israel's democratic ethos. They no longer believe that they don't have a right to criticize Israel and that they should defend policies with which they disagree. And they think that Jewish institutions and leaders should be publicly critical of policies to which the vast majority of American Jews are opposed. And they don't see the current government as doing everything in its power to reach a final status peace agreement with the Palestinians. And the challenge is that our institutions, often based on the first assumptions, are taking policy positions that are radically, fundamentally at odds with the growing number of American Jews. And so the Iran deal is a good example. Federations largely came out against the Iran deal, even though the vast majority of American Jews supported the deal and the administration. And so what we have are institutions that are taking stances that no longer represent or reflect the attitudes of a growing number of American Jews. And the problem with that is that our institutions are, I think, risk becoming irrelevant or anachronistic for young Jews if they can't adapt themselves to the changing understandings and attitudes of young Jews vis-a-vis Israel. So the question is, how do our institutions adapt? How do we change our institutions so that they can reflect a changing reality and changing attitudes? How do our institutions maintain their relevancy in the face of this paradigm shift and in the face of the changing concerns and sensibilities that a younger generation of Jews are bringing to the fore? I think the stakes are quite high, because if we get it wrong, we will not only drive Jews away from the Israel conversation, we could drive them away from Jewish life altogether. And I think it's in the interest of our institutions to figure out a way to be more receptive and to adapt themselves. Or I really do think our institutions will lose relevancy. Quickly on the second part, I think the way that you engage Jews are precisely on the issues that Danny doesn't want us to talk about. I think Yehuda's right. I don't think we can engage Jews on the broader issues. I think we engage them on issues of occupation, on issues of the Orthodox monopoly in religion in Israel, and issues about which Jews are deeply concerned. Jews are not disengaging from Israel. They're not going anywhere. They're looking to engage with Israel critically. They want to engage with Israel critically, and they want to do it within Jewish institutions. And the question that we face as a community is, will we be receptive to those voices, and will we engage them on the terms on which they want to be engaged? And I think many of these Jews that are engaging critically are doing it because they really do believe that Israel is the single most important issue in the Jewish world today. They care about Israel. They care about what happens in Israel. They feel responsible for what happens there. They feel implicated by what happens there. And they want to play an active role in shaping Israel's identity and future. And we as a community, I think, should foster that, and we should encourage them. We should find constructive ways for them to engage with Israel rather than pushing them away.
Great. And Harry, what do you think?
I think Yoav framed quite well the challenge facing our major institutions in American Jewish life today, which is a challenge of representativeness. And I think one of the things that millennials expect from the institutions that they're part of is a sense of ownership and a seat at the table. And I think figuring out structurally how to accommodate a really meaningful conversation which sufficiently incorporates the perspectives of younger people and bridging the generation divides between younger emerging leaders, students, younger Jews, and the older generations of American Jews who are supporting our legacy institutions is a major challenge. But in terms of what millennials are looking for, I think they're also looking for authenticity. Not just in this specific question, but generally in terms of everything that's being sold to millennials. Authenticity has a very high premium. And so precisely the type of engagement that does not shy away from talking about what is taboo, that grapples with what is difficult, and that opens up the conversation in a manner that seriously engages young people on the big questions facing the Zionist movement and the Zionist idea today. Questions of peace with the Palestinians, questions of regional security, questions of internal identity within the state of Israel. These are enormous questions which I think are the questions of our time, and also for which there's not really a sufficient mechanism for expressing any type of exchange between Israeli society and American Jewish, and the American Jewish community. And so I think figuring out how to solve for that is really important. Yehuda Kurtzer spoke about this moment that occurred between David Ben-Gurion and Blaustein of the AJC early on, where essentially there was a bargain made in which the kind of Zionist parties outside of Israel would take a backseat to the major philanthropic institutions that would support the state of Israel. And I think in that kind of exchange, there was something that was lost in terms of the pluralism that existed and the contest between competing visions of what, not only that there would be a state of Israel, but what kind of state that would be. And I think that stuff is what composed the moment of the Zionist idea and what animated Zionist politics. And I think that is truly a meaningful source of engagement for young people. And I just want to respond to the model that Yehuda offered us, which I think is really interesting, about kind of seeing through the metaphor of family and opting for another metaphor. And there's something very interesting about the investor-stakeholder relationship and also the shared common ancestor. I was thinking about this model in terms of my own relationship to Israel, and there's something very true and difficult to argue with. I think about my relationships in Israel, and many of them with my family are by virtue of the fact that we have shared great-great-grandparents who lived in Poland. But I found the model somewhat lacking for me because it's not just the fact of the matter that we have a shared ancestor, but at some point in my life there was a very active decision to foster a relationship upon that basis and to build a genuine, meaningful, direct personal relationship with my family in Israel, but with many other Israelis, with the language Hebrew. And one of the things that I worry about is in sort of considering the trends in American Jewish life in the Pew Study, and then reading about what is going on in Israeli society, I see two societies that are adrift and are trending in very different directions. And I worry that it's going to create a widening gap in which there's insufficient relationship to bind our two communities together. And I think it's a really important question to ask. I don't know if I have the answers, but it seems to me in an age of digital instant communication and online community and a transformation of conceptions of what the nation state is and what community is, that this is one of the key questions we should ask ourselves about in the 21st century. What does it mean to be in relationship between our communities?
Just on the topic of Jewish institutions and talking about Israel with young people, I think in my experience, Jewish institutions, the establishment institutions here in this country, are really scared about losing young people. It's a huge topic of conversation in almost every meeting. What do we do with young people who are turning away from Israel, turning away from the community? And I think out of that fear comes a couple of responses that just haven't been working. One is there are these issues that are driving young people away. And if we can distract them away from issues of the occupation, of equal rights for all citizens, and say, look over here, there's this other stuff going on, that somehow we can protect them from those realities and keep them, because we're desperate to keep them, and rightfully so. But that tactic doesn't work because their primary concern, like my co-panelists have been saying, are about those issues, are about those fundamental issues, about what the Jewish state is going to look like, what protection for minority rights are going to look like in that state, and what's going to happen with the occupation. I can say that at the New Israel Fund, where I work, we work on a whole range of issues, social justice issues, across the whole sector. And young people come in the door, and an increasing number of them come in the door because they think that at the New Israel Fund, they're going to meet Israelis that are working to end the occupation. Like, they say it over and over and over again. And the truth is that they will. It's one of many, many things that we work on, but that's the thing that young people are coming in the door for. And I think that's a really interesting thing for the establishment organizations to understand. New Israel Fund for the pro-Israel community is about as progressive as it gets, and that's what young people are coming to us for. So I wonder what that means for the more mainstream institutions in terms of how to reach those young people, when that seems to be the conversation that they are predominantly looking for. And the second thing is Harry just briefly mentioned the 21st century and the internet. And I think one of the things that's also changed since I was coming up in the Zionist movement in the 90s is the internet, the access to information, to op-eds, to things that haven't even been published in the mainstream media that people are saying about Israel. And so to lift up what Yoav said earlier, the young people that I meet are well informed. They're reading. They have access to a lot more information than I had when I was a teenager. And that's also a huge thing for the community to deal with, that we can't hide things, that we can't distract things. The internet is there, making a lot of different stuff available to kids all the time.
We were asked to speak to some of the questions that are coming in from the audience. I want to say, because of the limited time, we're not going to have, unfortunately, as much time as we all wanted for some of these questions. And I don't want people to be disappointed, but I do want to let you know that I think most of the panelists will be attending the reception that's after this. If people are interested in following up directly with questions, we can try maybe to have one person address the question that's on the screen, though. Which is an ask to speak to the relationship of Israelis to the children of intermarriage. This idea that there are children of intermarriage who have gone to Israel and been told that they're not Jewish by Israelis, and this issue of intermarriage in the United States, and we know many, many young Jews today have only one Jewish parent, and how does that play into the relationship with Israel? It looks like Harry wants to jump in.
So I think it's intermarriage, but it's also a much deeper issue. Intermarriage is one function, but I think one of the things that you're also seeing is a reaction to a form of Judaism in the state of Israel, controlled by the Israeli rabbinate, which allows for a monopolization over the meaning of Judaism by a faction of Israeli Jewish society, by the ultra-Orthodox, which bears very little resemblance to the forms of Judaism that the vast majority of Jews in this country are accustomed to. And Jewish pluralism is a widely held value, and kind of attitudes towards intermarriage, which are fueled by certain power structures in Israel, by this dynamic that I'm describing, is one among many trends, including the demonization of Reform Jews by officials in the Israeli government and by the Israeli rabbinate, that I think are a source of deep alienation for young American Jews who ideally would see themselves as part of a collective, entitled to be part of Israeli society if they so choose, but for whom their very Jewish identity is delegitimized by religious authorities in Israel. So I think to respond to Danny Gordis's claim about this, whether we like it or not, it speaks to a core issue of identity that is a boundary for identification with the state of Israel. When Jews in America, Jews of various degrees of observance and denomination, consider their own Jewish identity in light of what's being said in Israel, it produces a distance.
So Sarah said when she introduced us that this could be either a really depressing conversation or about disillusionment or a conversation that leads to hope. And especially since we are the last panel of the night and because I believe that there is a lot to be hopeful about. And this is, unfortunately, we need to wrap up soon. I want to ask directly that you end us on a note of hope. This conference is themed Zionism 3.0. And I want to know how it's possible for Zionism to resonate with this generation. What are the examples you've seen that are hopeful? What are the things you're engaging with? Or what ideas do you have that might create this hopeful future? And Harry. Thank you. Okay.
So for me, having studied Zionism basically my entire life and having spent more than 10 years living in Israel, Zionism has always been aspirational. And I personally don't believe that it stops being aspirational now. And I think particularly when we're talking about young people, Zionism means talking about the problems, not only the problems, not staying on the problems, but providing an on-ramp to the things that are of the deepest concern, and providing ways for young people to engage in ways that make them feel like they're meaningfully contributing to the project of Zionism, which today, in my opinion, looks like social change in Israel. It looks like challenging religious freedoms issues. It looks like promoting peace. It looks like promoting equality. And those kinds of issues that are really eating away at young people, they don't have to be hopeless. There are thousands of Israelis working on the ground every day to make their lives better and to make a better future in Israel. Providing an on-ramp to that for young people, to me, is part of aspirational Zionism, and that is something that I think resonates with many, many young people who want that relationship, they want that engagement, and they want the meaningful connection. They don't want to be sidelined. They want to be part of making it better.
I think young people are struggling to find a just Zionism. And the kind of moment that is seizing young people in this country, I think very much is wrapped up in issues here in America of racial justice and questions of justice more broadly. And that has many facets, both including finding a solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It has resonance in terms of the domestic questions that what kind of society Israel will be and what the meaning of Israeli citizenship will be for its citizens. But I think the message of hope is that Zionism at its basis is a movement that was seeking justice and Jewish liberation, and its founding document provides a really remarkable roadmap for the type of society that it should be in. And I think another source of hope is that we as Americans, whose own founding documents are aspirational in nature, that recognize that in order to be American, it means to be seeking and yearning ever to form a more just society and a more perfect union. That's something that there's work to be done, and I think that that's a really hopeful message that is extraordinarily appealing to young people.
You know, what so animates me about Zionism and about Israel, and the reason why I have chosen twice to move to Israel and make it my home, is because Israel is still very much an unfinished story. It's an unfinished project. And something that is so exciting about Israel is that it really feels like there is a lot to be done in Israel today, and it feels like there is really a struggle going on for the future of the state and for the soul of the state. And I wanted to move to Israel to feel a part of that struggle. In a very deep way, I believe that ultimately Israel's future will be based on its ability to defend itself not only militarily but also morally. And that's not a naive or radical idea. David Ben-Gurion said the same thing in 1926 in a speech to the Yeshuv's assembly, that ultimately no political claim will last long if it's not based on a strong moral foundation. I think that Zionism fundamentally is a moral and a just idea. And the challenge today is that certain kinds of Zionism in Israel, certain historical manifestations of Zionism that unfortunately are often shaping Zionist discourse in the future of Israeli politics, are making it increasingly difficult to defend Zionism on moral grounds. I think the challenge of our community in Israel and and around the world is to fight with every means available to us in our community to ensure that a moral vision of Israel is realized, that Israel represents the very best of the Jewish people, that it represents our highest values and our highest ideals, and not some supernatural expectations that Israel will become, this model society, but that it realizes its own ideals enshrined in its Declaration of Independence. So I'm determined to fight for the vision of Israel, for a just Israel, for an Israel that treats all of its citizens equally regardless of their religious or national origin, and an Israel that represents the very best that our people has to offer. And I hope that our community, our leaders, and our institutions will also actively work to shape and secure Israel's identity and future.
Thank you. Thank you to each of you for your own honesty and authenticity and for your message of hope and your commitment. I think we have to wrap up, but we will be around if people want to talk later. Thank you.